You know the news. You know that pretty much the entire planet is in an economic meltdown that few believe we can ever recover from. On the other hand, if the economy were to have some sort of a weak recovery, we'd only be supporting a broken system that would eventually break down again, permanently. Let's take a few minutes to look at the major problems in our systems, and afterwards I'll present some solutions that we could implement quickly and easily. As we move along, we'll define what makes a society happy and constructive, or miserable and destructive. For many years, the United States led the world in terms of societal happiness, and also helped raise the standard of living for people in many other countries. Sadly, that changed, and we are now leading the world into that miserable and destructive society. Here are 4 key issues that we'll take a brief peek at. Wealth disparity, tax reductions, legally defining a corporation as a being, and global profit motive. Think of the federal budget like a line balanced on a box. As you'll see, this model creates an antagonistic relationship between economic classes. Let's say the line on the left side represents the assets of the bottom 95%, while the line on the right side of the box represents the assets of the top 5%. Up until the 1980s, the more progressive tax system had kept the budget balanced for many years, but then something happened. The tax laws were drastically changed overnight in great favor of the top 5%. Their capital gains would now go from 70% down to only 28%, and later to only 15%. And since only 19% of this group's income is actually based on earnings, the other 81% came from capital gains. The government had actually written its own death warrant into law. This gift to the wealthy was marketed in a way that seemed to make sense to the other 95% by means of a new term, trickle-down economics. Its premise was that tax breaks to the wealthy would result in investment in more jobs. Sounds like it should work, right? We should have learned from history that the wealthy and powerful only want one thing: more wealth and more power. Here are the tragic results 25 years later. I call this insanity by the numbers. The top 1/2 of 1% own more wealth than the bottom 50% combined, 156 million people. In 1985, the wealthiest 5% of the population owned $8 trillion. Today, that same group owns $40 trillion. That's more wealth than the entire human race had created prior to 1980. Less than 35% of their wealth could actually pay off the entire national debt. As of January 2011, the debt per citizen, each man, woman, and child, equals approximately $45,374. In 2010, just the interest on the national debt was $414 billion, or $1,326 for every citizen. John Lewis once said, "The present state of affairs is the perversion of a proper working of capitalism. It is all wrong to have millionaires before you cease to have slums. Differences of reward must be large enough to induce people to do their best, but the present differences are far too great." Of course, if corporations had never been given the title by law of legal beings, we never would have had this issue, and lobbies never would have existed. There simply would have been no easy way for the wealthy to purchase the laws that favored themselves. To further exasperate the squeeze on the middle class, corporations moved to globalization, where they could extract maximum profits by creating global competition for the lowest wage. In other words, they would seek out countries where slave labor was abundant. This was a pivotal point for the world. Now, instead of lifting the standard of living in the world, we were lowering it to the standards of the third world countries, all in the names of corporate profit. All of these factors and others made their own major contributions to the mess we find ourselves in today. When wealth and power are controlled by a few who created the systems that funnel all assets back to themselves, eventually there is no money left for the masses, and the world becomes indebted to itself. Sound familiar? Though I could go on about the problems our world faces for hours, I won't. I want to separate myself from the doom and gloomers who would have you believe that the world is going to end and you should just stick your head in the sand. I also want to separate myself from those who believe activism can somehow change a flawed system from the top down. Historically, real change has only ever come from the bottom up. Unfortunately, most of that real change had to come in the form of violent and bloody revolutions. I'm not going to propose a violent or illegal solution to any problem. When the few make the decisions that affect the many, they will most often prioritize for their own gains and the gains of their friends first, if given the opportunity. Conversely, when the decisions of the many affect the many, the solutions are equitable for all. This applies not only to business, but to government as well. The spending priorities and authority of the government have become absolute insanity themselves. And later I'll touch on the simple principles of a citizen-owned government that is truly by and for the people. So now that we've gone through some of the problems that a dog-eat-dog system perpetuates, I'd like to finally move on and get to some solutions. I'm going to make a bold statement that may seem ridiculous as a solution to the magnitude of troubles that we currently face. My hope is that once you see the simple quotient for success, you'll be energized and encouraged to take action because you know that there is a way to change the world for the better, and you can do something very easily. This is something that people already do every day in the world. With a few simple principles applied, can supply rewards we couldn't even dream of yet. Are you ready? Here it is. Start or support an employee-owned business system. Crazy, right? Just doesn't seem like a big fancy idea with a lot of bells and whistles. And it would take forever to work. It's too small. Wrong. Employee-owned businesses could easily be the solution to many of the issues humanity faces today, as long as they have a few simple principles written into their charter. And if you're still thinking to yourself, there's just no way this could work, there are too many obstacles, I tell you, say nay to the naysayers and say yay to the yaysayers. Okay, yaysayers isn't a real word, but I think it should be. Maybe you've been conditioned to need these kinds of big ideas to come from someone who looks important, to accept them as credible. For you, I've included a picture of myself in a suit and tie, though honestly I much prefer jeans and a t-shirt. Besides, I've always been told that the suit doesn't make the man. As for the time it would take for this model to sweep the world, a familiar explanation of exponential growth is in order. Let's say I offer you two different payment options for the same job that'll take 30 days to complete. I'll give you either $10,000 a day for 30 days, or I'll pay you a penny a day and double the previous day's pay for each of the 30 days. So day 1 pays a penny, day 2 pays 2 pennies, day 3 pays 4 pennies, day 4 pays 8 pennies, and so on. Which one would you choose? At the end of the $10,000 a day option, you would have earned $300,000. At the end of the doubling payment system, you would have earned $5,368,709.12. This is the power of exponential growth. So finally, what are those simple rules I mentioned earlier? Or as I would call them, principles of humanity. From here on out, if you miss anything, the system in its entirety won't make any sense. First, let me preface everything laid out here by stating that this is only one of several variations of a model system. From the first week employee to the 20-year veteran, all employees would have an equal share of profit in the company. In this way, all employee owners maintain equal motivation to maintain a good work ethic and police themselves, and thus only refer people to the organization that have good work ethics. And don't confuse this at all with communism or socialism. You have the power and freedom to go to any company, and each company has a different profit margin, i.e. pay per employee owner, There is nothing at all in common with socialism and communism. The next rule in play: the company must never be available for outside investment of any kind, i.e., listed on the stock market, as that would create an additional owner in the company, though with a greater share than any other individual employee owner. Besides, why do you care about the stock market? The vast majority of it is owned by the elites. Sorry, I digress. Now, as well as equal ownership, and therefore hourly pay, all employee owners will work the same number of weekly hours, with any unplanned overage minimized and compensated. The benefit for length of service will come primarily through position transfer. This means that the employee owners, throughout their employment, will be given the option to bid on other available positions as they become available, through expansion or other personnel changes. This would prevent mundane boredom in their position and creates the possibility for a progressively lighter workload as the workers age. All employee owners must vote on reinvestment proposals at regular intervals. This keeps them active and participating in the company. No benefits are offered through the company, meaning health insurance, dental, 401k, etc. The decision to purchase these benefits should be left to the individual. In this way, the consumer will create better market conditions that actually drive the best products and not companies to the front. If an employee owner leaves the company, they have no more investment in the company and are owed nothing. If these concepts of having no benefits or permanent ownership seem outlandish, consider this. The employee-owned company has an objective of creating equitable work and pay for all, and prevents debt to itself by remaining fixed on producing its product, not making personal life decisions. For example, if by operating efficiently and dividing profits equally, each employee made 3 times what their corporate counterparts made, it would be quite easy for them to fund their own benefits of choice. People in general want to make a contribution to the betterment of their company, especially when they have a stake in it. When they have a stake in it, they have motivation. When a group of people is motivated to share ideas freely for the mutual benefit of all, they become more innovative, productive, and profitable. In fact, this work environment promotes friendship among all employee owners, no matter their title or position. Let's call this motivation internal capitalization. Once unleashed, this business model would soon start to take over all other business models based on several factors. The first consideration is the talented people at competing corporations, who also want to be a part of a system based on fair wages and lacks the stress that comes from political backstabbing that corporate structure promotes. The new model is more organic and seeks to benefit humans rather than a balance sheet for a few at the top. The final and most important rule of law we see at work in this charter is this. Since the employee-owned business depends on suppliers of raw materials or other manufactured goods to produce its own product in most cases, a portion of the profits should be set aside to give birth to another such employee-owned business to provide the needed materials or goods. Other options would include purchasing an existing company for conversion or doing business with an established company that has already been certified as the same type of new business model. What would the cost to the employee owner be to set aside this investment? Absolutely nothing based on the gift they themselves received upon entry to their own employee-owned companies. As the model states, though, external partners of the new company are not allowed, and the startup gift must be free of obligation. In this way, another employee-owned company is born of goodwill and benefits others. This is a great way to promote not only the business model, but also promote good ethical practice through the internal working components or raw materials of the product being produced by the company. This means integrity of the materials. Consider this the pay-it-forward business model, if you will. Think of the possibilities and how the spreading of this simple model could defeat poverty and misery globally. It's a big concept to wrap our heads around, but its humble beginnings can be sparked anywhere and spread like wildfire. So what would the job market look like? Imagine that this business model has permeated society, and that you are a machine operator of some sort. You make good profits as an employee owner at your company, but you'd like to earn a little more. You can either use whatever talents you have to improve the team you work with, or you can look to another company that has a higher profit per employee owner. An employment ad might start with something like this: ABC Company, LQ PPO 26450. This represents the last quarterly profit per owner, which was $26,450 for each ABC employee. So now, I'm able to make an educated decision about what my best opportunity is. Either way, I can grow my current company, or I can grow my occupation. So the reward system is now built in, and it's performance based on how well I do my job, not what job I do. If I were the best lineman in the world, I might be an employee owner at a company that pays the most. At the same time, a manager would earn the same amount. Why? Both positions are equally important to the operations of the company, and neither man has the ability to do the other's job. If the lineman isn't there, production stops. If the manager isn't there, chaos ensues. But then again, maybe I start my own employee-owned business. The possibilities are limitless. Okay, so now I'm ready for the attack campaigns. The attacks on this concept will come primarily from the mainstream media and the wealthy who own the mainstream media. The wealthy could see this new concept of business as an attack against their wealth and try to kill the business. Why would it pose such a threat? Remember, they can't buy into your company as an investor since it's not listed on any market. The wealthy don't want to contribute by working, they want to reap through investing. They also would see their own talent leaving for better conditions at employee-owned businesses, and their own systems quickly being dissolved by means of exponential growth of the new model. They would accuse the system of being socialistic, communistic, fascist, Marxist, and a whole host of other evil terms. In operation, if many or even all companies were based on these principles, each company would have its own profit margins and therefore pay scale. If you don't make enough at Company A, you can always go to Company B. You'll also hear things like, paying people fair wages is too expensive and won't work. If that statement were true, GM would have closed its doors in the 1940s. If that statement ever becomes reality, we are doomed. Like the Inquisitions, the new model will be called a witch and a heretic by those who feel threatened by it. They will attempt to publicly flog the model with no trial. In truth, the new business model would liberate communities and people. With the stock market eventually gone, there would be no skimmers. Demand for a company's product would dictate its size more naturally through the masses rather than corporate advertising. Non-beneficial or harmful products would be replaced by new innovations for the betterment of all mankind. Laziness would be replaced by motivation, and self-policing would keep the system efficient. There would be no reason to steal ideas to get ahead or step on others to climb the corporate ladder. One doesn't exist. What's good for one is good for all in this model. It's not a political system, so all political arguments can be invalidated. It avoids the stock market, so the arguments of the wealthy become null against it. Its nature is liberating rather than oppressive, so activism and reform can support it. If no one can find a valid argument against it because its construct is such that it attacks no one, it becomes an unstoppable force wherever it is introduced. Because of this, attacks against it come through either ignorance of its operations or by means of false accusation. In this way, the model represents the Trojan horse, which could be carted right into the midst of the current system unnoticed and make great change without the fear of legitimate attack. Just a note to business owners. I recently had a comment from a business owner who posed a somewhat valid argument before realizing the dynamics of the system. He said, "Of course socialism is going to be cried. That is what you are proposing. I own a corporation, but under your rules, I would have to let my employees own it. They have no investment in my business, and I don't want them to. I am the boss, and I want it to stay that way. Why would I want to answer to someone else?" My answer to him was this: socialism, or communism, creates unfair compensation or artificial boundaries for those who want to achieve more by working harder or smarter than the next guy. If I have the ability to work for any company I want to, and some pay more than others. Where is the unfair compensation or artificial boundary in that? This model could work for your business if you were willing to make it so, because you could envision what the vested interest of employee owners could do for productivity. There are some types of business structures that could be converted, though new startups would be ideal simply because most owners can't bring themselves to share the reins by having faith in their employees. If I owned a company and Warren Buffett applied for the job of running my company, wouldn't it make sense for me to give him the driver's chair? Of course, if I didn't know who he was and I put him in the mailroom, I wouldn't ever realize his potential, and neither would he. The point is that talent comes in all shapes and sizes, and often those talents that could benefit a company are never known, thus never realized. If you like your business structure the way it is, it can remain that way, of course. I'm not proposing something that's mandatory from the top down. I always work from the bottom up, where historically all real change has come from. Believe it or not, the simplified model of this employee-owned business is not a far stretch from a citizen-owned government model. As you know, the mechanics of government, especially here in the U.S., have become cumbersome, costly, chaotic, and corrupt, the 4 C's. Without a populist vote, the government does not follow the will of the people anymore. The ideas of the Founding Fathers, though imperfect themselves, have become so twisted, wrenched, and purchased by greed, that there is no humanity left in the beleaguered system of government. So where does this happiness come from? The people, through the aforementioned business model, are given the essential ingredients for happiness in life pursuits and full equal opportunity for employee ownership. So what happens when a citizen-owned government of much smaller size and scope is actually implemented based on these like principles? Just as the employee-owned business model was attacked by those who could stand to lose something, so too would the new citizen-owned government be attacked. In the same progression as well, though, the new government model would eventually be demanded by the people of other nations, as they witnessed its liberating success and potential for humanity. By this point, the new business model would have already been experienced in their countries as well, showing it as a superior model to follow for the benefit of the many and not the few. As the current system goes, it's a nonsensical concept to believe that the entire world is indebted to itself. If I were an alien studying Earth, I would consider the animals to be the most intelligent life forms on the planet, and the humans somewhere closer to the amoebas, although amoebas don't consciously torture and destroy themselves, so they probably have us beat. So let's restate the steps to get started. The first step is to share the ideas with others, and especially those who have the ability to light the first flames with a gift to start the new employee-owned business model. Earlier, I stated that the wealthy would put up a fight against this business model, and almost all will, based on the fact that they would be supporting a less equitable position for themselves in the long run. There will, however, be the rare humanitarian who is wealthy. These are most often the wealthy who have come from humble beginnings themselves. If you are one of those people, I implore you to get involved. Wouldn't it be great to know that you were one of the founding fathers or mothers of the Pay It Forward model that changed the world for all humanity? You could be the one that gave the gift that started a fire. The second step is to start the business or convert an existing one and implement all the principles described earlier into the business charter as irrevocable. If just one of these rules is changed, the system will not work. The third step is membership in an organization that promotes and certifies the new business is indeed chartered on the principles of humanity model. If all the principles are implemented, the company will be certified as such. The organization then will promote the companies and educate the consumer and other companies about the ethics and benefits of using this model. Since each business is encouraged to either create or buy out their existing supply companies, therefore converting it to the same model, the growth of the new model is truly exponential and permeates all types of business and industry globally. The final step is up to us as consumers. We can make decisions through our purchases and support a system of happiness for the many, or we can support a system of happiness for the few. I'd like to close on a final thought about happiness through equitable society, and tell you a little bit about myself. Allow me to describe the happiness that fair pay employment can bring to a community versus the sheer devastation that comes with greed. A condensed story of my hometown, Flint, Michigan, is the best and most personal story I can relate to you. The city has a very rich history of industrial innovations and later many social innovations. To condense this story even further, the greed of the wealthy General Motors owners created more grueling and dangerous working conditions than exist anywhere in the world today, and for slave labor wages. Speaking of slave labor, blacks were not allowed to work at GM factories. As a result of these years of oppression, some of the workers formed the first union. It was a secret union for fear of reprisal that would later become the largest workers' union in the world, known as the UAW. The men devised a clever, though dangerous plan to lock themselves into critical portions of key facilities, effectively shutting down the entire operations of General Motors. This became known as the Great Sit-Down Strike of 1937. General Motors workers had finally won a battle that made tremendous gains, not only in fair compensation, but in the deplorable and dangerous working conditions that they had endured. Workers everywhere now had rights, and those improvements trickled down to many other industries which formed their own unions. Today, we can thank those courageous few, whose efforts beat the system for the rest of us. Their efforts created a whole new class of people, the middle class. With less worry about daily survival and decent working conditions, the community began to flourish through its citizen involvement. And an almost utopian society of the "how can I help" attitude permeated. Many new ideas came about and were implemented based on their benefit to the community as a whole. If you've ever attended an after-school activity of any sort anywhere, you can thank the city of Flint, where the community school system was invented in support of community activity. The Board of Education was created in Flint, Michigan as well, and up until the early 1980s, you could get a college education for little or no cost. The cultural center alone rivals that of any in the world. Flint became a shining example of what could be created with a happy community that had resources. The citizens were willing to give for the common good, and as for General Motors, they continued to have record profits for many years to come. Workers were no longer discouraged from talking to one another, but encouraged to share ideas that could improve operations. Flint celebrated GM continuously and paid homage to the company that gave it life. Sadly, in the 70s and 80s, the corporate laws of greed would again take the reins at GM, and the UAW would be evaded and nullified. Though the company still had profits in the billions, it saw that by moving its factories to third world countries, where workers' rights didn't exist, more profits could be made. After all, slave labor is more profitable, right? You may remember this story from Flint's most famous resident, Michael Moore. His documentary, Roger and Me, painted an accurate picture of Flint and the devastation General Motors inflicted through its profit motive. This decision to outsource labor for the lowest price globally devastated many cities and supporting industries throughout the country, but Flint was hardest hit by the tidal wave. Flint has now gone from a population of 200,000 with 80,000 GM workers down to a population of 100,000 with 8,000 workers. And even those workers are being paid less, 50% less. The company abandoned its birthplace and lineage. Thousands fled the city of the unemployed, foreclosed, and abandoned dreams. Also abandoned were the thousands of houses. Left to disrepair and vandalism, they litter the city like trash piled high. Many have caught fire as the homeless squat in these forgotten spaces, burning anything they can to stay warm in the bitter cold Michigan winters. The murder rates, violent crime, poverty, lack of education, drug use, unemployment, and debt of the city all rank in the top percentages nationwide. GM had just taken a giant dump on its birthplace. Over 30 years, Flint had become no more the shining example of a community involved, but an abandoned industrial war zone. My hometown was now the complete antithesis of its former glory days, via the greed of the skimmers at the top. How many dreams broken and families torn apart, one could only imagine. These are personal tragedies that have occurred on massive scale that I hold corporate greed responsible for, and that greed starts with the wealth mentality of skimming, especially in the stock market. What if, instead of just closing down all the factories in Flint, GM had decided to just give them to the employees under the proposed employee-owned business model? GM would have had the benefits of good rather than bad PR. The cost of demolition would have been nullified, tax and entitlement liabilities transferred, and a portion of their customer base preserved rather than destroyed. As for the new employee owner, Many of the benefits have already been described, though it would certainly be an understatement to say that Flint would have been immensely improved today if the employment had remained. A little about me? Well, I'm 43 years old, married with children, and a lifelong musician and philosopher by avocation. Though if my avocation were an occupation, I suppose the title might be something like humanities engineer. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat, though at one time I thought I was both. I don't hate anyone, including even the mega-wealthy and the politicians they purchased, although I'd love to reason with them. I grew up on the east side of Flint, Michigan in the 1970s and 80s, and my family still lives in the outlying areas of the city. I attended Stevens Elementary, torn down, Williams Elementary, now closed, and the Flint Academy, also demolished. My brother went to Johnson Elementary, closed, and the School of Choice, demolished. My dad went to Lowell, closed, and Flint Central, closed. My first teen jobs, I worked for a painting company, closed, a landscape company, closed, White House Pizza in Rollingwood, closed. I sometimes worked 2 jobs and worked at a hardware store, still open, and for a slumlord. In October of '87, I decided to clean myself up and get a real job. I got a part-time seasonal sales job at Things Remembered in the Cortland Center, Eastland Mall for all you old Flintoids. On December 23rd, 1987, I took a stroll down the mall on my lunch break and said hi to some guy that was working in a jewelry store. Turns out, he was the owner, and that chance meeting would change my life's path out of Michigan. I managed a store in Flint for a year, was asked to manage a new store in Canton, Ohio. I got married in '94 and moved to Pennsylvania 16 years ago. In 1997, I got into the insurance industry. I worked my way up the corporate ladder with naive bliss, and I soon found myself the district manager of a large life insurance company. Times were good, so I thought. I quickly discovered the hard way what corporate politicking was all about. Lesson learned. I will never work for a large corporation again. I haven't lived in Michigan for over 20 years now, yet every time I go back to visit, I'm saddened by its slow rotten disappearance. I long to return to my old hometown, and my heart yearns for the city to somehow return to what it once was. There are masses of scattered expatriates who feel the same way about their old Flint. What an odd legacy for its citizens and scattered remnants to be left with. Although I'm glad to see some of the efforts at downtown revitalization projects in universities, I'm equally saddened to think that all of my memories could be torn down and boarded up, as so many others have already been. Experiencing a great society turn into total depravity overnight will do one of 4 things to you. Either you become depressed and unbelieving that you can make a difference, disinterested in denying that a problem exists for you, angry and fighting a futile battle for change from the top down, or determined to make a difference from the bottom up by supporting the principles of fair wages, good working conditions, and opportunity for all. If love was the law, this last option is what it would look like.
We make life so complicated every day. No time, I got some place to go. There's a higher purpose to our lives. Are you wondering, do you want to know? Stare up into the light now, baby. You realize now it's true. There's at least one thing for you.
Just sitting here, reminiscing about old Flint, watching some kids play over there. This brings back old memories of hanging down here with my mom. Oh, I don't know, early 70s. Going to Montgomery Ward's, which has been closed for years. And, I don't know, just kind of reminiscing, but I really love this city. Had a lot of good times here. Seeing these old streets, especially the brick. No other city has brick streets. And it's Flint, Michigan. That's the cool thing about it. And I love this city. I love the city. I love the place where I grew up, all my friends. lot of life left in this city. So here we are up at the old house, and here is my handprints from 1978. Actually, there's a lot more than just those ones that you can see right there. So I'll put my hand. Wow, it's yeah, my hand's grown a little bit.